Welcome to World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley reporting here from Washington, D.C. This is now our Guy Fawkes Day show, November 5th, the first day that this program will be heard. But we're going to dispense with the preliminaries now and go right to New York City and get a first-hand eyewitness report. What's going on with Occupy Wall Street? Where are we in the ebb and flow of the mass strike process? No better authority than our friend Eric Draitser. Eric, how are you?
Doing well, Webster. Thank you.
So give us the rundown. What's happening?
All right, so the dynamic in Zuccotti Park has changed pretty dramatically from where it was about 4 weeks ago. Now, essentially what's happening in the park is that you have these tents have gone up, and it has basically become occupied not by political movement or anything. It's really occupied by homeless people, transients, and other so-called, quote-unquote, undesirables, that is to say, people who are not really part of any political movement, but are rather there for the free food or for, whatever other reason they might be there. The other thing, the reality on the ground in Zuccotti Park is that it is really impossible to walk into that park and to have any kind of a real political conversation with anybody there. In fact, because of the actual logistics of it, it's very difficult to even stop moving. That is to say, the paths have become so narrow that you're really being shuffled along at a sort of a walking pace through the park, no matter where you are. Outside of the perimeter, you have these barriers that have been put up by the police, and as soon as you stop moving to talk to anybody, the police come by and tell you have to clear the sidewalk, keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. In other words, going to Zuccotti Park has really become an exercise in futility. Beyond that, as it's gotten colder here in New York City, the park has become less and less the epicenter of any political activity, and they've established this so-called spokes council, which I'll talk about in a second. But many of these so-called spokes, they meet at 60 Wall Street and various other indoor atrium public spaces where they have these working groups. Now, one of the positive things that I can report about what's happened is I was able to go to one of these working groups last Sunday, and this was actually a working group that ostensibly was talking about the political demand of jobs for all. Now, this is sort of an abstract notion, of course. Jobs for all really isn't a concrete demand, but it was a good place to start. So I was able to go there, and I was actually able to get myself in touch with a few people who had gotten beyond, and actually many of them were veterans of political movements, sort of as you might imagine, who were interested in the creation of a political program, interested in putting forward demands. And so I was able to go in there with my 4 points, that is the amnesty on all student debts, stop the foreclosures, Wall Street sales tax, and nationalization of the Fed. And I had a generally positive response. Now, one particular instance I can give you is of a woman who was in that working group, and she was trying to give me the two arms in the form of an X, that is to say a block on what I was saying, because she was saying that they were not there to actually create a list of demands. They were there to talk about the need for demands. And I said, look, stop wasting everybody's time with this nonsense. Let's put together demands. Let's bring it. If you are all going to be mentally and emotionally subservient to the notion of a General Assembly, fine. At least let's bring concrete demands to a General Assembly so you can at least, force people out into the open to take a position. So
she's trying to bring the paralysis from the assembly into the workshops.
Right, but what she did, right, exactly, but what she did, and she was, from what I could tell, and I feel like I've gotten pretty good at it, she was not an agent. She was just a dupe. You know what I mean? She was just somebody who really believes in this nonsense and who sort of took an emotional, as an emotional affront to her own being when people said, look, dispense with the nonsense. Can we just have a actually get frustrated with her, because the idea was that this group was to have a conversation. It wasn't even to follow these insane protocols. So anyway, the conclusion of that was that I got a positive response from people there, and actually I was sort of, someone came up to me afterwards who ostensibly was one of the leaders or one of the people, in charge of the spoke of this, council that was going to go back to the General Assembly, who told me that they were definitely ready to take up the foreclosures issue, that they were still a little bit iffy about the notion of nationalizing the Fed. And I said, well, look, I could get more into this, but I didn't have time at the moment. But I was like, if you at least even take one of the points, I'll take that as a victory. So I'm still trying to find out whether or not this actually got through the General Assembly. Like I said, it's very difficult to even get into Zuccotti Park at this point without being accosted by, homeless people or whoever else is there. I mean, it's the same thing that your guest from a couple of weeks ago talked about happening in Madrid. You bring in the homeless, and it becomes an unbearable situation for the majority of people. Not that there's anything inherently wrong with homeless people, but at the same time, you can't have a political space if it's being perpetually invaded by people asking you for change and for cigarettes. So this is the idea. So anyway, that's point
How about
number
your
one.
efforts to sort of get some of the intelligent people who realize what's going on and get them into a kind of a caucus on the edges of it all?
So we have. I was able to get in touch with a couple of people. One of them was an African American gentleman who is from Harlem. I guess a veteran of various other political movements, and he was really talking about mobilizing action for a bill. I believe it's 1596 in the Senate, Senate Bill 1596, which is dealing with increasing the funding, maintaining and then increasing the funding for public housing and for infrastructure development and for various other really socially necessary programs. And I said, let's get on board, let's work together. So there are productive people in there who I think have come in and trying, like I am, to use this moment, this opening, this opportunity to actually put forward real demands and actually support real legislation that is trying to do something. I don't have the information on who in government is currently supporting that bill. I believe it's called the RAD bill or something like this, but people can go on govtrack.us and they can look it up for themselves. It's 1596. I believe it's in the Senate in committee. The other bill that I had spoken with this gentleman and a couple other people was Marcy Kaptur's House Bill 1489, the reinstatement of Glass-Steagall. Again, certainly not a solution to anything, but a place to start and something that can actually mobilize a political force coming out of the Occupy movement. So these were actually productive conversations that were happening within this working group or within this spoke of the Spokes Council. So that's important. However, there are a couple other pieces of information that people who might have read the New York Post or any of the other national papers would have seen. There was this bizarre incident yesterday at Zuccotti Park, essentially between some kind of a homeless provocateur and some other, I don't know what you call him, some sort of a lunatic or I don't know what. But basically this guy was screaming obscenities at people, kicking people, hitting people, and someone else came and started a fight with him and knocked him out. And this is all on the cover of the New York Post. The idea here is this is a discrediting of the movement. This is making it look like it's been taken over by complete crazies and that violence is breaking out. The cover stories on the Post are all talking about sexual assaults that are happening at Zuccotti Park, the fact that the residents of downtown Manhattan, of lower Manhattan, have become fed up with the constant drumming and the graffiti and all the rest of it. The idea is this is all building to a crescendo that should probably come in the next couple of weeks where they're going to essentially lobby Mayor Bloomberg to kick them out of Zuccotti Park and to try to basically break up the movement that way. I think that what's happened, though, is that with the establishment of the Spokes Council and whatever else, that Zuccotti Park is becoming less and less the epicenter of this, or rather maybe it's the epicenter, but less and less significant in the grand scheme of things, which can be seen as good or bad. It depends on who you're looking at, how you're looking at it. Now,
Eric, can we get the names of the people on this Spokes Council? Are they public or are they all undercover, like the National Transitional Council?
Well, like I said, unlike the National Transitional Council, these are not Al-Qaeda thugs, but at the same time, you know what? From what I can tell, I don't mean to speak for all of the different ones because I didn't bother to try to even get in the conversation on most of them. But from the Political Demands Action Group that I was involved with, everybody was willing to give their names. I had the gentleman the African American gentleman who I'm now communicating with by email, as well as somebody from the College of Staten Island, to the CUNY.
Hang on, Eric. Can you come back for a couple of minutes?
Yes.
Okay, we'll be right back on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We want to continue with our direct report from the ground there at Occupy Wall Street. So we have the Spokes Council, Eric, you were telling us, and they seem to be public. And are these the people that we see on Olbermann and these other left-wing television shows?
Well, I think that there's a couple of different types of people that are involved there. The people that I was connecting with, I don't believe that these are people who would never necessarily even say that they're all about Occupy Wall Street. I think that these are political activists, political people who have, like me, seen that Occupy has sort of brought out into the open a lot of the issues that need to be discussed and are sort of trying to capitalize on it. So these are people who are not necessarily 100% emotionally devoted to the consensus model, to the General Assembly, and whatever else. These are people who are basically trying to get things done and using the Occupy movement as a conduit to do it. Now, I'm speaking specifically of the people that I met in the political demands group. I think that many of the other groups are still very much all about the General Assembly and consensus and all the rest of the nonsense. But from the people that I was speaking to, that I thought were productive people, they were not afraid to give their names. In fact, they were giving out business cards. Who they were academics, they were political activists, people in the actual neighborhoods trying to organize, not foundation-funded community organizers necessarily, but people who were actually on the ground trying to fight for real issues and real demands. And this was basically the statement was, the rest of you be damned. We know we need political demands, and this group is going to try to make it happen. And so that was the idea. And so it was quite productive, I have to say. Now, there's a couple of things that I want to...
Do they reconvene? Is that group going to be continuous?
My understanding is that they're going to be meeting every Sunday, and so I'm trying to get in there, and I've actually sent out a few emails to people who were willing to share contact information with me so that I could stay in touch with them. It's quite difficult, as you can imagine, because of the scattered nature of this movement and the unpredictability of New York City weather. So, this is something that is sort of touch and go. And to be honest with you, there's no naming, there's no labeling. So it's kind of like you have to know where it is and when it is, and you have to just show up. But at the same time, the idea is to get in touch with people, to connect with these people, and to form parallel organizations, other organizations through Occupy Wall Street outside of their model of consensus and the rest of it. Now, in the limited time that I have...
You need an alternative steering committee. Let me propose the following. When you know when that Sunday meeting is, why don't you let me know? I'll put it out on Twitter, and you can do the same, and maybe we can get the... la creme de la creme of New York City to come to it and constitute that as, again, an alternative steering committee.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing is that I found out about it about 4 o'clock, and it was convening at 5 o'clock. So it's one of those things that, was very last minute for me even. So, but yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely productive. Now, I want to quickly comment on what happened yesterday with this march to Goldman Sachs. Now, this is another one of these events that's most likely directed, though I don't have specific evidence to this point, but I believe committee once again organizing a march that really is symbolic only, that has no real tangible value, no real demands that are being made. And so what you see is, instead of marching to Goldman Sachs and talking about a Wall Street sales tax, or marching to Goldman Sachs and trying to, agitate against flash trading or whatever it might be, they march to Goldman Sachs, they link arms, and they sit down and they allow themselves to be arrested. Now, I'm not...
And I think the subtext was that George Bush was there, which was exactly what Olbermann and these fakers on MSNBC loved.
Right, and so again, it's just like in 2007 when you realized that the foundation-funded left wasn't anti-war; they were just anti-Bush wars. So it's the same principle. But I wanted to point that out because again, what we see is the lack of demands and the lack of a concrete political program makes you look like a fool. And the majority of the population, I think, in this country looks at something like that and they say, okay, so these young people came, they got arrested, so what? Life goes on, Goldman Sachs continues. You did nothing to subvert Goldman Sachs. You did nothing to actually attack them where it hurts. And this is the idea, and that's why the political demands group is so significant. Now, the other thing that I wanted to point out was what was happening in Oakland, and